Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Dane, your host. I hope you're doing well wherever you may find yourselves. Today is my part 2 video, bands I effin' love and are downright obsessed with. So let's continue. Last band I mentioned. Nope, I'm not going to tell you that because if you haven't seen the first video, watch that one first. All right, next band I'm going to talk about today is a band I love and are obsessed with is King Crimson. Now, I love everything from that debut in the Court of the Crimson King through and including Red, and then there's parts of the Beat era, if you will, that I like. But if we stick to in the Court of the Crimson King, that debut, what a great debut, perhaps modeling itself after the Moody Blues, but more than that. I'm not the first person to say that. My favorite song on In the Wake of Poseidon is the quirky and fun Cat Food, Cat Owner, go figure. But the whole album is wonderful from start to finish. And in many ways, it's a continuation of the first album. Not as good, but I think it's close. Now, Lizard is a bit of a falling off for me. I do like most of it. But there's something missing compared to the first two, and I don't mean Greg Lake. I love the Islands album. I think that's underrated gem, if you ask me. I think King Crimson does jazz, and there's the Ladies of the Road song has a bit of a Beatles flair to it. The harmony there is just great. I'm not sure if that was done on purpose or not, but I think that it was Fripp's homage to the Beatles. Now, one of the greatest trilogies of all time, Lark's Tongues and Aspic, The Great Deceiver. Great Deceiver. I like being silly sometimes. And then finally, the album Red. And of course, for me and so many of us will argue, opinion of course, that the gem of the Red album is the song Starless, which I've spoken so much about already. But John Wetton and crew, John Wetton, Robert Fripp, and Bill Bruford. One of the greatest trios of all time. So King Crimson, and the last thing I'll say about them for now is not only is their studio stuff dynamite, but their live stuff is dynamite. Whether you're talking about the original incarnation, the Buzz, sorry, I'm losing my mind here. The Boz Burrell era, the Islands era, right, one and done, or the Tony Levin era, as I call it, with the three drummers. That's some really good stuff too. So I had to mention that. The recent incarnation, even though they've done little to no new studio work, that's some amazing stuff there. All right. Next is Scorpions. Whether you're talking about the debut, which is a krautrock psychedelic album, kind of blending those two together. Hey, you got a 15-year-old Michael Schenker on there. I think it's an underrated gem. It's not a masterpiece, but it's an underrated gem. It's a diamond in the rough, if you will. And then through that and including Love at First Sting. After that, I pretty much stopped listening. I tried every album after that, but I just can't get into it. But again, these two videos are about, doesn't matter if I don't like the last third or the last half or last part of the back of the catalog. It's about I'm still obsessed with them. They could suck now, but I'm still obsessed with them because there's a part of them, there's a part of the discography that I'm still obsessed with, and I'm always wanting more. And because they may have broken up or they're just putting out stuff that's mediocre or worse, I'm still going to gravitate. They're that good, I'm going to constantly return to them is what this is all about. So Scorpions. Next is Motorhead. You have some stinkers in the catalog. The World Is Yours, I don't care for. The album after Inferno, which Kiss of Death, is not very good. Motorizer, not very good. And it's got a yellow look to it, and I can't remember the name of this. There's one song on there. It's got Raw in the title that I like. So there's four Motorhead albums I don't like much, if at all. But the rest of the discography is some wonderful stuff. Now, the band peaked, arguably. Well, their best run is the debut, through and including On Parole, up to and including Orgasmatron, and then there's some really good stuff after that, but not as good as the Filthy Animal, Lemmy, Fast Eddie Clarke era. But then they're starting to find their feet. You get March or Die and Bastards, which has some good stuff on it. But then Mickey D and Phil really come into their own with Lemmy, and they start to gel, and you get albums like Inferno, right? And Aftershock. So there's some really good stuff there. So Motorhead, I have everything by them but those 4 albums, because I don't feel the need. I'm not one of these collectors that collects to collect. I have to like something to collect it. So Motorhead is just part of my DNA, if you will, ever since I discovered them flipping through a Hit Parade magazine one day, and I was like, who are these guys dressed in black who look dirty in this black and white photo? Someone commented, did these guys ever take a bath, right? That kind of thing. But anyway, looked like they were working on a car, but that's not what the name of the band means. Anyway, so Motorhead next. If you've not seen the first video, none of this is ranked. Next is the band Sleep. You have 4 albums. You have the debut, which is very hard to describe. It's doom metal, but it's in its infancy. It's, at least for them, it's a bit unpolished and raw, not in the sense that it's heavy raw like Metallica's first album, but it's premature. It's not the right word. It's not half baked. It needs a couple more minutes in the oven, kind of thing. But I like it. But the true good Sleep stuff is The Science is their last album, Sleep's Holy Mountain, and of course, Dung, right? Dope Smoker. What a great band. I saw them live. They're wonderful. And in a similar vein, High on Fire, I'm obsessed with and just absolutely love. You have no sleepers or stinkers in this discography at all. Although my least favorite would be Luminiferous, I believe, yes. And then Electric Messiah would be my second least favorite, but it's pretty much all good. Matt Pike, the more and more I listen to him, becomes closer and closer to be in the top 5 of my favorite guitarists of all time. No one will dethrone Alex Lifeson, but Matt Pike is definitely one of the greatest, and seeing him live with Sleep just reaffirmed all that, or confirmed that. Snakes for the Divine is fabulous. Death of this Communion. Blessed Black Wings, their magnum opus. Wow. Even the Sons of Thunder instrumental was just phenomenal. What a great way to close an album. Very Motorheadish, but yet not Motorhead. To quote the back of the Boston Record, listen to the record. All right, next is Cirith Ungol, although Tolkien pronounces it Cirith Ungol. No band sounds like this. They're considered sword and sorcery / doom metal. Tim Baker's vocals are not for everyone, is what is said out there. Well, you be the judge. I'm not going to say that. I'm just quoting other people. I like his vocals. I think there's something unique about it. For some people, it's too grating or nails on a chalkboard. For me, I eat it up. So their magnum opus, I would argue, is their first album, but everything in their discography is just, it blows me away. It never gets old. The live material there is great. If you're not familiar with them, check them out. Next is the glam band Sweet. Fell in love with them at an early age. Very bubblegummy, and yet you get some hard stuff too. There's some heavy stuff. I remember listening to, as a kid, very young, 6, 7, 8 years old, Little Willie, and what's the other one? That's very bubbly or bubblegumish. There are a few, of course, and then I remember being in the record store, and there's an album cover that I had to double take at because, like Van Halen 1, it's split into 4 photographs of each 4 band members of Sweet, and it was called Sweet Heart Centers. It was a compilation album. So I picked that up, and it's called Heart Centers because it's their heavy stuff from Desolation Boulevard and Give Us a Wink, and maybe one from a song or two from Off the Record, if I remember. It's out of print, but I had it on vinyl, hung it up on my wall proudly next to my Van Halen 1 record when I was still living at home in high school. And songs like Cockroach and Fox on the Run, Cockroach, Yesterday's Rain are on there, and No You Don't, and oh God, it's Superhead. It's got the galloping. Anyway, but that made me realize that there's more to Sweet, as much as like the SATURDOY Bay City Rollers type music that Sweet did. Okay, very similar. Just made me go into thinking, hey, let me try this and find these heavier songs on their studio albums, and they were out of print, so I had to go to a local used record shop, and I found the American version of Desolation Boulevard and Give Us a Wink and Off the Record, and paid a pretty penny for it back then because I just had an allowance, and lo and behold, there are these heavier songs. So anyway, Sweet, something charismatic about it, whether you're talking about Brian Connolly's voice, the underrated guitar playing of Andy Scott, the underrated guitar playing and singing of Steve Priest, and what great drumming. The drummer's name eludes me, but what a great band. And, if you listen to Sweet, you hear just a touch of Paul McCartney and the Beatles, just a touch in his solo career. You hear the Archies. You hear what's to come later with Jellyfish. You hear Cheap Trick, the B-side Cover Girl, a Sweet song, sounds a lot like Cheap Trick, or other way around, right? So Sweet, one of my favorite bands of all time, and I'm totally in love and obsessed with them. Next is Whitesnake. Whether you're talking about they're blues-based, starting with the first album, Trouble, through and including Slide It In, and then you get into the hair metally phase of the band, and you get, stuff after that's a lot of love songs, right? Always had that, though, even with the bluesy stuff. Now, there are 2 versions of Slide It In. I prefer the American version because you get the best of both worlds. It's a segue between their bluesy era, first album, Love Hunter, right, Ready and Willing, Come and Get It, Saints and Sinners, right, and that segues into Whitesnake 87. Whereas the European, or rather British version or UK version of Slide It In is just the bluesy Whitesnake you know and love. And of course, a lot of people over in the UK or Britain felt that David Coverdale did them wrong by moving into more American sounding rock. I like both. So I think that Slide It In, American version, and Whitesnake 87 are their best 2 albums. All right, so Mott the Hoople. I've spoken much about them on this channel. I did a ranking the albums, including Mott and British Lions, not too long ago, about a month or so ago, and Glam at times with Mott and the Hoople, those 2 albums, and all the young dudes, Bowie revitalizing their career by giving them a song because they were struggling. But everything in their discography I gravitate towards, even the country-ish Wildlife, and I've talked about that. Their debut is a little raw, but it is a good album. It's not great, but it is good. So Ian Hunter and the Gang, Mick Rouse. Wow, what a band. Next is Uriah Heep. And you have the different phases of Uriah Heep. You have the David Byron era. And those first 3 albums, or first 4 albums, they keep going through bass players and drummers, right? Especially bass players. And then they finally seem to have found their bass player with Gary Thane, but he only sticks around for 4 albums because he passes away. But the debut album, just called Uriah Heep in America, or Very Heavy, Very Humble in Britain, through and including Abominog, but take out Conquest, is my favorite run. And Conquest is just short of abysmal, I think. Not quite a coaster, but It's close. Coaster for my beverage, right? What a debut. And the sophomore effort, they take a gamble and do a full-length side 2 with the title track Salisbury, which I love to death. The third album is very uneven, but it works in the same vein that Led Zeppelin 4 has all different types of music stylings on it, but yet it works. Usually uneven is a negative, but here it works. You have some bluesy stuff with the slide guitar, and it's just, you have the proggy July Morning, just a great third effort, and then their magnum opus, Demons and Wizards, and then a close to their magnum opus, Magician's Birthday, a nice pair. They complement one another so well. I've talked about that before. And then the majesty of Sweet Freedom, not a perfect album, but a beautiful and wonderful, solid album. Just something wonderful about the title track and Stealin' especially, although I like the whole album. Even when Byron's singing the alphabet, I like it. So song Pilgrim is wonderful, and 7 Stars, etc. Wonderworld is a compliment to Sweet Freedom. It's kind of a parody, sort of, but I still like it. It's not as good as Sweet Freedom, but I do like it. Last album with Gary Thane. Then you get into High and Mighty and Return to Fantasy, which there's a falling off. Return to Fantasy doesn't return to fantasy enough, and then High and Mighty is more of a, as many people have pointed out, is more of a solo record for Ken Hensley. And then you get into the Lawton era, which I'm love to death, most of it anyway. The trilogy of Firefly, which is the best. Then Innocent Victim, which you have Trevor Bolden over from David Bowie on these 3 albums, and then the very good but not great Fallen Angel. All right. And Abominog, a comeback album because of the abysmal Conquest, and you have a very Lou Gramm sounding Peter Golby with some interesting synths from Sinclair and some amazing guitar from Mick Box, and you've got the 80s keyboardy thing, but it works. It's not the horrible that is Equator, right? It's 80s, but it's not new wave 80s. It works. It's got some heaviness to it. It's got some love songs. It's got some, AOR. It's got some, ballads, and half of them are cover songs, but they're fabulous. Start to finish, great album, Abominog. All right, UFO, underrated band. Their best album run, Phenomenon, through and including Making Contact. Although I do like some of Misdemeanor, if I have the album title correct. The one after that with the girl, the tattoo holding the gun, right? The EP that follows that is abysmal, trying to continue that hair metally style, but on this EP it doesn't work. I do like the first 2 albums, the space rock kind of stuff. It's not great, but I do like the boogie stuff there. Hadn't found their signature sound there. They're great live. I have tons of their live material, which is bands that have wonderful live material like Hendrix and Mahavishnu and Zeppelin. They only have 2, but you get my point. So Zeppelin doesn't have tons, but you get my point that if you do live material and you do it well, that kind of elevates you, in my estimation, as what makes a great or amazing band. All right, so UFO. Next is Judas Priest. There's only 2 stinkers in their entire catalog. That would be, or close to stinkers. On Turbo, I like maybe 3 songs, and Firepower, I maybe like 4 songs, and everything else I am, for the most part, enamored with, especially, or rather, including their most recent effort, Invisible Shield. The only song I don't like on that is the title track, Panic Attack. At one point growing up, I was struggling with whether or not Judas Priest had supplanted Led Zeppelin as my favorite band. Well, neither of these 2 are my favorite band anymore. Rush has been my favorite band for God knows how long now, but at one point, bands dethrone bands all the time. At one time it was Zeppelin, then it was Rush. But when I listened to the Hellbent for Leather album, or Killing Machine, when I listen to Evil Fantasy, something about that makes me think of Zeppelin, and I'm not sure why. Anyway, the bluesy part of it, I guess. So Judas Priest. Next is Black Sabbath. perhaps one of the greatest 6 album runs of all time, starting with the debut, then Paranoid, then the beginning of doom metal with Master of Reality. Volume 4, for me, is a little falling off, but I do like it, the album. It's good, it's not great. And I'm not talking about changes. I've talked about this before. And then you get into the wonderful Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. That opening title track is one of their heaviest songs, one of their most dark and cynical songs of all time. Interesting lyrics. And then you have it's probably their best, from a sonic or tonal standpoint, their best engineered and produced album. And you get Spiral Architect has a moody blues vibe. It's just amazing, the whole album. And then you get Sabotage, which is my favorite. And then you get into the Dio era, 3 albums with Dio, Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules, and later on Dehumanizer. And has some great live stuff as well. Live Evil comes to mind. Reunion comes to mind. The 2 live discs that come in the Sabotage box set are wonderful. Live at Last is wonderful. Not Live at Last. Past Lives is wonderful. So Judas Priest, folks. I mean, Black Sabbath. Judas Priest and now Black Sabbath, excuse me. Next is Deep Purple. My favorite album run is, as much as I like those first 3 albums with Ron on vocals, Rod Evans on vocals, and Nick Simper on keyboards. There is, that Vanilla Fudge vibe that they're copying or inspired by on those first 3 albums, and I do like it. You have Addresses and whatnot. You got heavy songs like Wring That Neck and Mandrake Root, which is those 3 songs. Hush, those are the 4 best songs, I think, in the catalog. I do like Kentucky Woman, even though it's a Neil Diamond cover. But once you get into In Rock, right, Rod Evans is fired, and Richie decides he wants to go after Robert Plant. So the story goes, but Robert Plant's not leaving Zeppelin, so he wants to compete with Led Zeppelin. So he gets a wonderful singer in Ian Gillan, right? Doesn't sound anything like Plant, but he does have a high register. It doesn't have the Janis Joplin-y raspiness to it. It has a more cleaner, organic's not the right word because Plant is organic. It has a more cleaner, almost near operatic style. If you listen to Child in Time, things like that, or the ends of certain songs, right? Just a unique voice, if you ask me. But In Rock is the closest thing in the 70s, not counting Black Sabbath, to a heavy metal record at the time. Proto-metal, definitely. That's their heaviest record. But I love me some Fireball. I love Machine Head. I even love Who Do We Think We Are? Some people poo-poo on that. I love the comeback album, Perfect Strangers. I even love, very much so, it even rivals the Ian Gillan stuff, the David Coverdale era, right? Someone help me out here. The first with David Coverdale was Burn. Not a perfect album with some great songs in there. Most of it's phenomenal. A couple songs I don't like or mediocre. Then the underrated and album lots of people poo-poo on it, but I love is Stormbringer. That opening song, like Burn, is just so heavy. The couple ballads, Gypsy and Soldier of Fortune, I think are phenomenal, and everything in between. I love the whole album from start to finish. And then the underrated Come Taste the Band, I think with Tommy Bolin is phenomenal, or close to phenomenal. There's something special and magical about that album. Glenn Hughes, great. All right, Led Zeppelin, my second favorite album. My second favorite band of all time. At one point, they were my favorite band of all time, but what a discography, as short as it is. If you get the triple disc version of Coda, it makes the album better. That's, to me, in other words, I think the 3-disc version of Coda is the definitive version of Coda. It has, Hey Hey What Can I Do on it now, and some wonderful bonus tracks. And it revitalized my love of those songs on there, if that makes sense. Maybe it has something to do with the remastering. Who knows? Is it as good as the other albums? No. Well, I think it rivals In Through the Outdoor now. It's that good with having those 2 extra discs. You have the greatest tetralogy in all of rock music with Led Zeppelin 3, Led Zeppelin 4, Houses of the Holy, and Physical Graffiti, because as I did in a different video, that most of the songs in those 4 albums, or 80+% of them, come from the Headley Grange sessions. And let's face it, Led Zeppelin 1 is very unpolished and raw, but it's dynamite. Led Zeppelin 2 is as we've all agreed about Zeppelin, the Brown Bomber is just a phenomenal album. There's a couple songs in Houses of the Holy I don't like, but overall it's a very good album. And Physical Graffiti, their magnum opus. Presence is an underrated gem, if you ask me. It's a little derivative of some stuff on T for One, I think, is a bit derivative of Since I've Been Loving You. But Achilles' Last Stand, Nobody's Fault But Mine. Man, what 2 of the greatest songs in their entire catalog. Am I missing anything? Well, In Through the Outdoor. Carousel Alhambra, for whatever reason, makes me think of, even though it sounds not exactly the same, but something, not just because it's long, makes me think of Rush's Camera Eye. And this is a Plant, John Paul Jones endeavor, because Jimmy Page was recovering, dealing with his heroin addiction, and Bonham, it was kind of in his own little world. My understanding is, I don't know, but a lot of it, some have argued it sounds like a Robert Plant solo album. Well, I would argue it's more of a, because of the writing credits and whatnot, it's a Plant Jones composition for the most part, and it has its moments, and it's worth having in your catalog. So Led Zeppelin, I still love and obsessed with. Rush, my favorite band of all time, as you know. Their greatest run is their debut, even though it has 8 songs, and 4 of them are superb, and the other 4 are just above average. Maybe 1 is below average, but I'm counting it in the run. So the debut, because you have, let's face it, you have Working Man, which is an 11 out of 10. In the Mood, which is a 9 out of 10. What You're Doing is a 10 out of 10. And there's another one that I'm thinking, which is a 9 or 10 out of 10. So the debut through and including Grace Under Pressure is their best run. Their peak, though, in that best run would be, if this makes sense, would be the sophomore effort, Fly By Night, through and including Moving Pictures. So Fly By Night is just an amazing classic rock album. It sounds like a classic rock album the first time you listen to it, if that makes sense. And then the third album is underrated. It's dark and melancholy and so heavy at times, in different meanings of the word heavy. 2112 is a magnum opus for many of us. You could argue that both this and Moving Pictures are masterpieces, but for different reasons. I think Moving Pictures is their magnum opus, and then 2112 is close to that. They're both excellent, though, but for different reasons, as I said. Farewell to Kings is a masterpiece, I think, as well. And sometimes I like Farewell to Kings more than 2112 some days, most days. And then you get the part 2 with Hemispheres, Signus X1 Book 2 on the album Hemispheres, right? And 18 minutes or 19 minutes of wonderful proggy goodness. And then you get side 2 with the wonderful Circumstances, heavy at times, and then The Trees, which is a wonderful proggy keyboard-driven song for the most part. And then you get the wonderful La Via Strangiato, right? And then you get what we know is coming with Moving Pictures, and that is that proto-Moving Pictures, which is Permanent Waves. A great album from start to finish in its own right, which is a great companion piece to Moving Pictures. I'll often listen to these back-to-back as a double album, as I often do with Farewell to Kings and Hemispheres. But I mix up the tracks a little bit for Permanent Waves and Moving Pictures. I have a playlist. Maybe I'll talk about that one day, make that a video. And then you get Signals, which is a falling off, but it's grown on me. This is their Police phase. And then Grace Under Pressure, very similar and yet different at the same time. Still very Police-like, because they were influenced by listening to, especially Pert. And then they come off the rails, I think, for a little while with the next 3 or 4 albums. So the Police phase is 2 more albums with Power Windows and Hold Your Fire, but the first 2 are the best of those 4, that 4-album run. And then, like I said, what makes a great band in many ways is really great live material, and Rush has a slew of wonderful live material where you're talking about All the World's a Stage, which is just dynamite, 12 out of 10. Exit Stage Left, 11 out of 10. Because of that, one of the reasons, because of you have their version, you have a wonderful version of Passage to Bangkok, but especially because of the more invigorating and exciting and electric opening of La Vie a Strangiato, and that 3-minute mark solo is the nonpareil. Then you get different stages. Then you get all the bonus live stuff on the reissued versions of Moving Pictures, the live in YYZ, right? Or YYZ, as us Americans say. And then there's some bonus material with the reissue of Farewell to Kings, reissue of Hemispheres, reissue of Permanent Waves. And then you have some other stuff out there that you can get that are bootlegs or not bootlegs, other live material that are just wonderful. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, my part 2. My follow-up to my part 1. These are the bands that I'm effing in love with and I'm effing obsessed with. Have a wonderful day. Take care now. Bye.